to this shipper update. I'm Zach Strickland here with Chief Economist Anthony Smith, who I believe has some PMI knowledge to drop on us today, that industrial sector. Hi, Anthony.
That's exactly right, Zach. So we got an update from the PMI, and it showed a little bit of an interesting trend. We saw a downward movement. So it was previously at 57.1, now down 1.7 points to 55.4 percentage points, showing that there is still ongoing expansion. And those of you that might not be familiar with this index, is read as anything over 50 is indicative of expansion within manufacturing, while anything below 50 is indicative of contraction. And of course, we have here my trusty green line, my flatbed outbound tender rejection index I love so much here, just kind of showing some of that relationship when we're seeing expansion within manufacturing. We typically also see some of that flatbed also being utilized as well. We'll also kind of get into construction a little bit later on because we got some updates for spending as well, but we are still seeing that there is some continued growth, but slower growth overall. I think when we look at some of the headlines, this is going to be one of the slowest growth rates we've seen so far, and I think just around 18 months or so. I don't think that's anything to like ring the alarms about, because we've been talking about it for some time, that we're going to hit a peak soon, and there's going to be ongoing but slower growth in manufacturing. So I think it's still manufacturing season is still going to be going on strong, but there's still a lot of headwinds as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway there, is that the growth is slow, but that's not a bad thing. Like we don't, these overheated like sections of where we see these bubble growths, these pops, these strong upward trends are not healthy because they're not sustainable.
Exactly.
And they have a lot of disruptions that come along with them, and it lasts into downstream avenues well into the future and beyond, right? So I mean, we're actually in a pretty good spot in the industrial sector.
Exactly right. And it's something that you mentioned, I think it was a great takeaway in the carrier update before, just talking about some of the circumstances with what's going on in China. They have respondents that go into this report here, and one of them said that they have started to extend lead times to customers that are ordering product from China to cover demand through Q4. And this is going to be impacting, I think, a lot of folks at the latter half of Q2 into early third quarter. So there's going to be some extension going on there. A lot of planning going to have to be done around some of those factors when you're a shipper upstream here.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. I mean, especially, but this is largely focused on the domestic side, industrial manufacturing. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're not out of the woods by any means. I mean, if you're sitting there thinking like, oh, we're going into a recession and all this kind of stuff, it's way too soon to call a big economic meltdown at this point, right, Anthony?
I think so. I mean, if we were in a recession, yeah, we're halfway through it technically.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is of course, that the imports and the trade deficit that really took away a huge part of it. That's a huge, significant thing. But what we're seeing right now, of course, we have that American consumer that is not going to act rationally in most economic models. And so what we're seeing is that it's likely they're going to be able to push us through to a positive result in the second quarter. Going to be a little bit iffy around third and fourth quarter. I think it's going to be a little bit more hairy around there, but I think second quarter is going to look a little bit more favorable. But I think when we're looking at this chart, we have another one right after this one, going to jump into another subcomponent of it. New orders also ticking down ever so slightly, but still showing ongoing expansion, ongoing growth for those new orders still coming in right now.
Yeah, do you think that we're going to see some sort of uptick in these orders, especially as this China situation lasts, and of course the situation in Ukraine continues? Do you think we're going to start to see a little bit of a recovery in this one moving forward, because everybody's starting to get that sense of uneasiness again, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great one, because we're starting to see folks really starting to feel kind of similar vibes that they did roughly a year or so ago, because after really kind of getting around some of those shortages, some of the different variants, Omicron, Delta, all these other things, they're kind of starting to feel the same thing just because of what's happened with China. And it wouldn't be too much of a shock at all if we start to see some things pulled forward in that anticipation that, hey, I really have to get ahead of the curve because there's going to be a lot of limitations here. Going into our next chart here, another big factor to kind of take into account here is going to be around, of course, backlogs and prices. We're going to get to prices here shortly as well, but backlogs still elevated. So it's still above 50, showing that there was a reading of 56 percentage points. So a downward movement here, but there are still ample amount of backlogs to be worked through as those new orders continue to slowly come in as well.
Yeah, so this, of course, big factor, trying to clear out some of that logjam that we have upstream in the supply chains going on. But I'm curious to see what you have on your next one.
Yeah, so next one real quick here before we head out on the shipper update, we're going to have prices, and prices are still very much elevated. We're seeing that it moved downward slightly from an 87.1 now at an 84.6, so still within 80s territories.
Is it anything over a 70 is pretty much like out of control?
Out of control, exactly. And so we're still seeing that, okay, it came down slightly, but this is still very much rapid expansion at a pretty impressive clip here. So we're seeing that prices are still very much elevated. This is going to be another factor. So of course, for those that are shippers upstream, got to really dive into that relationship building, make sure that you are able to really make the most out of the situation, because it's going to be a difficult one for sure.
Yeah, no time to relax at this point. Well, thank you so much for that, Anthony Smith. We're going to toss to a quick break, but we will be right back.